Introduction to it today. For those of you who are, hopefully you get some insight into some more innovative products that are out there. So Kevin is husband, father of 3 young, beautiful, attractive girls, the youngest being the most beautiful and attractive, sweetest, and kindest, also being my wife.
I got that on.
So, yes, that's on video. And actually, I didn't know we were being video, so that's as true and heartfelt as I can make it. So Kevin actually has been in the pleasure lift industry almost his entire life. So I think he came out holding on to a lubricator in birth. From what I understand, his mother talks, it was very difficult, and it was difficult bringing him up, getting these plungers out of the scene. No, in reality, he's worked through several operators and had worked for a couple of large service providers before starting TriLift in 2010, and it's just been a success story from then forward. And without further ado, I'd just like to introduce Kevin to you.
Thank you. Well, the last time that I got up and spoke, I was preaching, so I'll have to kind of work that in somewhere maybe. But it's really an honor to be here. I was trying to think the last time I've spoke, it had to be before COVID. And I've done several classes and schools, and I've kind of did today's a little bit as a school, somewhat, but boy, I'm really open to go as deep and as wide as you want to get in the questioning time. Not that I would have all the answers, but I probably know a few people that can get you those answers. And plunger lift to me has been a lifelong passion. You know, rarely do you get to do something in life that you love. And there's times in my life where I didn't quite know if I loved it or not, because in every business, as you guys know, I see people in here that's got as much gray hair as I do, and maybe a little more. Sometimes work is not as fun as we'd like it to be, is it? But what I have found in my journey, that those are the times I grow the most. If you're not challenged, you're not pushed, you really don't find what's over the next hill. And one of the things that we did at TriLift, and I'm trying very much to not make this a sales pitch, because my heart is really in just helping people. As a minister of the gospel, that's who you are. And it bleeds over into my business. I look at some faces out here that I've known a very long time. A few customers are here. And life is all about people. If your life is not about people, something's wrong. But I will stop at that on that point. But plunger lift has given me the opportunity to just help people with their needs. And because I've done it so long, I've seen so many scenarios. And if the Lord has gifted me in one area, is I remember them. I have little rooms in my head where I've worked on products that I can go pull it off the shelf, and 5 years from now I'm working on it. I thought it was kind of funny. You may not think it's funny, but I can tell you which pickup in the lot's mine. It's the one with the oil on the hood. I've been prototyping a plunger, and I've been out in the field doing that myself. And no, I don't have to do that. No, I choose to do it because I do love it that much. So I really record everything that I do in plunger lift. And today I want to just talk a little bit about introducing plunger lift. Plunger lift is basically introducing a sealing agent interface, we might call it, in the tubing. And we're using that interface to seal in the well to lift our fluids out. People ask me, well, when do you know when to put a well on plunger lift? And typically what I like to do, let me see if I can work the slide. There we go. Is identify where the well is in its life cycle. You may have heard that before. If I can, and it's not to show light who knows what or doesn't, but how many in here that's ran plungers in their wells? Is there quite a few? Yes, there is. Maybe you've never ran a plunger before, but it's something you're here to hear about today. How many is that? Anybody? Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I figure there's probably a lot of knowledge in this room about plunger lift, because plunger lift's been around a long time. It really has. I ran my first plunger 42 years ago, and it was on a wind-up clock, like you'd wind a grandfather clock up. and you'd push pins out, so when it rotated, it would either open a valve to close the well or leave it on. And the only way you knew how long that plunger ran from bottom to surface is you timed it on your wristwatch. Well, we've kind of come a little ways further than that. I wished I had one of those boxes to put on my wall now. But identifying the life cycle of the well, every well has a life cycle, right? So from the most prolific to where it can flow on its own, down to where it is just the gas liquid ratio is really, really low. And how much fluid that takes, how much gas that takes. It's after determining where your well cycle's at, whether it's strong or whether it's weak, the strongest point of the cycle to the weakest cycle. Let's start with the strongest, which will be when the well can flow on its own, but at times it shows signs of liquid loading. A lot of times what you see your casing fluctuate in your well, where you're building up pressure on that backside to U-tube that fluid around. Maybe you start having to go out and swab your well, or you're having to intermit. A lot of times that's the first thing you do. You shut your well in for a little bit, you open it back up, you've just built enough casing pressure or reservoir pressure, depending on whether you've got a packer in the well or you don't. You're just storing up some energy to help unload that well. So in this case, I said a little bit about the sealing. The plunger is an interface in the well. So at that point, we'll try to introduce a plunger into the well. But before we do that, we need to make sure that our plunger well, our candidate, is ready for plunger lift. And that means a couple things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to, and I'm not going to say you have to, but I would sure like for you to. I will always try to talk you in to doing some slick line work. And that way we can determine whether our tubing is clean or not. This is a big thing that I see a lot of time. People try to cut a corner and not spending, today that's about $2,300, somewhere give or take a few hundred, to go out and broach a well, to find out whether you're clean to wherever you're going to want to set your lower spring in the well. And then you're going to go in and you're going to broach that well to make sure there's no tight spots. And that's where this wire line comes into. You want to broach that. Like a drift is, like most in 2 7/8, our plunger's OD would be 2.34. And so you would want to run a broach in there that's like a 2.35. Something a little bigger, that way you can travel up and down that tubing. There's nothing worse than going out and trying to get a well going and you were dead in the water. That's really good. You were dead in the water because your tubing's not clean. And you spend a lot of time, and you may spend more hours with other equipment, people swabbing, doing all kinds of things, and time is money. And so I have really found through the years, just spend the money up front, get the wireline set, get the bottom hole assembly set, whoever you're using. I'm going to say that today. I'm not here on behalf of cramming Tri-Lift down your vote, because there are so many good companies. I have so much competition, really good competition, really good products out there. I'm not the guy who thinks everybody else's stuff is junk. It's not. I didn't just arrive and then they all showed up after me. No, I've had to work and work and work to compete, and there's so much good equipment. There's a lot of experience out there in the field too. But my experience tells me, get this well ready. And the reason I put this like I did the slick line first and then the well work, if you've got some tubing issues, let's say this well is not a prolific well, like a gas assist well today. I mean, we're going to make sure that plunger can run. Even if we have to round trip tubing or whatever we're going to do, we would know that. And usually a gas assist well in today's market is not an old well. I'll get on a well that's maybe only been on gas lift 6 months. That's probably not a real good sign for the well, but that may be the case because there's so much liquid, and you're just going to interface in that and help that and introduce that plunger and assist that production. You're going to make that gas lift a lot more efficient by putting that plunger in there. So when you marry up in that well with that sealing agent, you'll come to surface and you'll unload it. And then we're cycling that well more. I'll get ahead of myself a little bit there, but so the well work I like to do second, because if there is a problem, let's shut it down then. We determine whether we can afford trip tubing. If I've gone out there and I've gotten roustabouts involved, I've bought fittings, and I've put this lube top, everybody'd say, well, go put the lube on first. Well, if your well's not where you can run that, you kind of spent some money you sure wish you hadn't have. So you do your slick line first, come in with your lubricator and get everything plumbed in, and then you're ready to rock and roll. Your plunger tech's involved with you, whoever you're using, you're ready to get that well on and get it going. Next slide, please. And what I've done here today, I kind of conglomerated a little bit of downhole equipment because there is a variety. Ever since we started drilling horizontal wells, we've kind of made things a little bit different to where, say for instance, my favorite love spot for a plunger bottom hole spring in a gas assist well is 35 degrees. That always gets asked. There you go, 35 degrees. And you may like to go deeper, but reason I choose 35 degrees, any product that I make, and you'll see some of them here in a minute, will run in that well over its life cycle. Always think about life cycle on a well. I used to, kind of a sidebar here, I used to get aggravated when people would drill slim holes. And boy, they're great when they're prolific, but boy, when they're not, and you've got a permanent packer in the well and you've got cement in there, boy, your options for what you do down the road are very limited. And that guy in the production deal said, man, why did they do this? Well, it's cost effective. The well's already probably paid for itself. So when you're talking about the life cycle here, let's put that spring where it can aid everything. There's been a study done in the Barnett, gosh, it was done about, I think 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where EOG did a study and they put the money, the backing behind it because they were going to put a lot of gas assist plungers on. And so they did the studies. They put certain wells in an area at 50 degrees and certain wells at 40 degrees. And what the determining factor was, they could put them at 35 degrees and not have to shut in as long, because when you start getting down in that curve, and I'm already headed down gas assist road here, I can see that. When you get down into that curve, into that deviation, you start falling slower. One of the reasons we can run balls and sleeves and plungers with really big ports where we can get to bottom fast, come back on, is the fact that we're not vertical down there anymore. We're at 35 degrees, and I've run plungers at 50, but I'm gonna tell you this, if you're running at 50 degrees, don't come back a year from now and go run a sliding sleeve at 50 degrees and wonder why you're having troubles. Because that sliding sleeve will not shift. It will lay down there on its side and you'll bypass through it and you're in trouble. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to shut that thing in too long to pop it, to shut it, and come back up. If you're experiencing that, there's a freebie. So one of the things you just don't want to do, you want to set yourself up for success down the road, because down the road gets here so fast. Boy, if that's one thing I was thinking about doing this speech today and talking about it, sharing my heart, is I have realized I used to be the young guy. I used to be the Cooper. And I was the young guy in the room, and I was having to work my butt off and working nights. And you know, I don't have an education. I tell people I'm the most uneducated person at my business. I don't have a college degree. I barely made it through high school. Got married when I was 17 years old. I did everything what they would say as a minister, bass-ackwards. And I did. But the one thing that helped me, my dad taught me how to work. He taught me how to work. And that's outdone everything I didn't know. Sorry about that. But the one thing you learn in life about doing everything that we do, there's not a man in this room that wouldn't want to be more successful. And we measure that every day, don't we? Every one of us does. Set your well up for success. Get it in the right place. Don't try to stretch it too far. Because later on, when that production, when you have to go, and I'm going to talk about a ball and sleeve here in a little bit, when you have to go from product 1 to product 3, well, the well is not as prolific as it was at 1, right? And it's not making as much money as it was at 3. And then $2,300 wireline cost to go change what you could have put in before, because it wasn't going to hurt it anyway. If a well is strong enough, it'll carry that fluid up to 35 degrees and then some. It just will. I've run too many of them higher than that when I couldn't get lower, and they ran. Because if you've got gas assist, you got horsepower. You've got help there. So what I wanted to do is show you a few of this here is what we call just a regular 2-cup hold down. And one of the things here that you wouldn't notice the difference of it unless I brought one with me, that fish neck, which is called a fish neck, right here, it's 1 3/8 in 2 3/8 tubing. And in today's world, we run 1 3/4 and 2 7/8 because for the impact reasons, but that is made out of titanium. And that titanium can handle shock, impact. When you run bypass plungers, don't think you're not going to have impact. I don't care if you put it at 50 degrees, you'll have them because there's no perfect world in operating a well. So if we've got a spring, if we've got a nipple in the well that we want to set in and it's in that, because a lot of times what I do, I work with gas lift companies and they're going to go out and redesign the wells. You know, you got 8 valves, 10, 11 valves in a well, and now you're down on the screened orifice and you've got a little issue, maybe you got a valve leaking. Hey, let's go back in. We're only going to put 2 valves and a screened orifice in that. You know what we can do? We can set a nipple right underneath that screened orifice, run the 2-cup hole down, and go from there. And we do that a lot. We run, another thing that we do, because a lot of people run the Packers, and I love Packers and gas assist wells, because I can make that plunger run. If you're running plunger lift in gas assist wells, I can't iterate this enough. If I owned 100 wells in gas assist and they were clean, they'd all have standing valves in them. Every one of them would. Because when you put a standing valve below the screened orifice, every bit of your injection gas goes up. Every bit of that energy helps me lift. You get a low bottom hole pressure wells in this gas lift world, maybe it's an Oswego or something like that, and you get a low bottom hole pressure well, and you get too much fluid trapped above that spring, and it'll just sit there, and you can't push it back. And you know what happens? That gas starts running into that formation. Then we just start creating a balloon. We start putting that gas injection on that formation, and eventually you get it hot enough and override, you're going to start getting up pressure where you can run. But you know how long that can take? How much energy you waste? How much buyback gas you do? That's a whole nother cuss word to think about, is buyback gas. Great to have it when you need it, but I don't want to make a living off of it because it costs you something. So we want to operate that well to where we do not have that. So in our spring selection, the next one I've also got here what we call a PRV. And that PRV is a pressure relief valve. And what I can do with that, and what your plunger lift companies, every one of them has them, they can set that inside this here apparatus. I didn't turn it where you could see the slot. There's slots on this one, same spring. And that ball can run up and down inside of here, and you put the PRV right there, and so then you can trap fluid. Everything that gets above it, you trap it. But what makes that really unique in here, if you want to limit what you trap, if you have low bottom hole pressure and you can't lift 2 barrels, you put a 1/4-inch barrel trap in there and it'll dump everything but a 1/4 of a barrel, and you can rock and roll with that and just keep moving. Just keep moving. You don't override yourself. You don't set your limitation where you're stuck. And then our next, this is a collar stop. We run a lot of collar stop combos all over the state of Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, you name it. These work really good. The only problem with a collar stop is when you start getting into high rates, they can come up the hole on you because of the pressure in this barrel, because all that has to displace out and run up that tubing wall. So then, if that's your case, you run a tubing stop. It's a 3-slip stop, and it will hold. The problem is sometimes they hold too good, but it will hold, and then you run a latch down spring, which is a collet here on the bottom. So you run your tubing stop in first, latch down on top of it, and then you produce through that. And then the last stage that I'm going to visit with you about in a well, because we're talking about life cycle, when that well gets down to where it's rough, it's tough, is the 2-stage tool. 2-stage tool has been around quite a while, but this spring goes on top and this spring goes on bottom. And what we're doing, we're running multiple plungers in the well. And what we're doing, if you just visualize for me just a minute, you've got let's say you got a barrel of fluid, 2 3/8 tubing, 258 foot of fluid setting on bottom. And let's say this well's 8,000 foot deep. All that gas above that fluid is sellable gas, but you're not doing anything with it to lift with, correct? Would you agree with that? So if I put this tool at 40% off bottom, now I have poor boy staged the well. Andy, isn't that right? Look at him.
I've had trouble with it.
Yeah, and if your well's hard, it can be hard, can't it? If you've got some restrictions. But one of the things that you can do with this tool is you can utilize that third of that gas that's underneath that tool for lifting. So here's just a gamut of different tools that we use to set up plunger lift. I don't know why it's not changing on me. Am I doing something wrong here? Let's see if it'll do. I don't know why it's not going to slide. Hit that next one if you will. Huh?
Try it again.
There you go. What I've got here is just kind of a picture of a well system. And just, I'm gonna breeze through this pretty fast, but I wanted to show this picture for anybody that's not familiar with plunger lift and where they could kind of see how the bolts and nuts and how things bolt up on a well. And what we've got here is and this is like a Hindeliter wellhead and your master valve. This is your lubricator. And then here's your well control valve, and then your plunger lift clock. And this is your casing pressure, and we're utilizing supply gas off that casing pressure. And we do that on about everything we can, unless you've got a packer in the well and you have no pressure, and then we'll utilize off the tubing and put a riser and grab that gas. So as what we're looking for in here, and there's a little sensor here, and I'll show you a picture of a sensor here in a second. That sensor is really kind of the brains of that operation, because what it does when that plunger comes up through there, it notifies the control box, hey, I'm here, and then it logs from the time the well came on to the time it came from bottom. And that's what we make all of our adjustments basically off of, is that arrival time. And I want to run that plunger about 750 feet a minute. Now on gas assist, you can throw that out the window, and I'll explain that here in a minute, but it's a different world. Here's our equipment that we use. This is your lubricator. You've got dual outlets, and usually you plumb those two in together with your valve on this side. I put two different pictures in here because this is what we do on a bypass plunger for a shift rod. When that plunger comes up through the lube, it hits that shift rod and it shifts that dart on it, or it knocks the ball off seat off the plunger. And here's your amble. And this is what we use for in that apparatus. Come on, let's go to the next slide. There we go. And this is just a picture of a couple of the controllers that we use. They're simple time controllers. You know, you can spend as much or as less as you want on how to control your well. And the optimizer controller, it'll run off, there's a lot of controllers out there that'll run off pressure, off time, off both, where you can really dial your well in. I love to work with pressure in certain instances where a well is finicky, especially if you take a long lateral and you're porpoising. But one thing you notice, if you have a transducer on your well, every time that well comes on for a plunger run, it logs that tubing pressure. And you'll see a history of that. And one of the things I've noticed over time, that if a well wants to porpoise every once in a while on you, and what I basically mean is, you've been lifting a half a barrel, now all of a sudden I got 3/4 of a barrel. Well, that load looks different to the well because I only stored up X amount of storage to make that last run, and I wanted them all to be the same. You know, we know that nothing's ever the same. So I can put a tubing transducer on that and make that well shut in till that time gets there. And usually it's maybe a minute more, because these wells, they build because you're injecting. And it'll just make that well really click. And then we've got simple time controllers where we've got automation where you can set at your office or your iPhone. We run controllers or wells on our iPhones. So there's a gamut of information and things that's out there that you can use. And here's your well sensor. And I remember when there used to be just one sensor, and now there's all kinds of sensors. But like this sensor here on the left, this is called a Cyclops. We don't make this product. We buy it from another company that's all they do is make electronics. But this sensor can do a bunch. It can clock speeds. It can clock the amount of speed running through the lubricator. It's pretty high tech. And then the simple one is this battery operated sensor here in the middle, which is the cheapest sensor. And then Mantronics, the people at Mantronics, they make both of these, but these are really good people. I met this gentleman about 5 years ago, and just common as the day is long. And he told me how he came up with, he was a pastor. He told me how he came up with the invention of running a sensor without a battery. Yeah, I want you to chew on that a minute. This sensor here runs with natural energy. You have enough current flowing through your well and through the atmosphere that he can use it and never run a battery on that sensor. It's pretty amazing technology. But your sensor really is it's the most cheapest component on the well, but I'm telling you, if it's not working, it will drive you nuts because you don't know when anything's happening. You don't know when your plunger's arriving. I want to get in now a little bit about bypass plungers. It's important to remember this. If you don't take anything out of this, if you're running gas assist, it's all about the life cycle of the well, but there's not any method in the oil field that's the same. Can we agree upon that? I mean, there's just so many ways, as the redneck in me says, you can skin a cat. So with that, all the different variations of bypass plungers, just think of it this way, and it's really simple, that we want the fastest dropping bypass down to the slowest dropping bypass in a well. Let's talk about falling from surface down. Because somewhere in that life cycle of that bypass life, you'll use those products. You'll step them down. You'll just step them down. And so you can match the right product with that well. And usually that takes some time for that to happen. It's not like 1 week we run this plunger and in 2 more weeks we run this plunger. No, it's not that way. But so it's real important to understand the different ways to run bypass. Now this is the ball and sleeve application. For those of you that are interested in gas assist, this is the most prolific plunger ever made and the most simplest. I like to say it that, the KISS method was really invented on this plunger. It is a ball and a sleeve. That sleeve has an 1.25 inch hole through it. This is a 2 7/8 plunger. And that's an 1.11 inch. This is an 1.11 inch ball. And what you have is variations of weights on those balls. There's 5 weights. To the heaviest, the more rate, the more fluid you bring up your well, the longer the sleeve and the heavier the ball I'm going to use. Because I've got to fall through that fluid with rate. So when that well comes on, let me just build a scenario. Follow me now. We turn the well on. The ball and sleeve is married up on bottom. The ball is inside the pocket. There's only a 1/4 inch of that plunger, that ball exposed on the bottom of it. So we come to surface. We start coming up and we're stacking fluids in the well as we come up. And you'll realize that in a minute as I get through the falling side of it. We come to surface. We start making that fluid. And we compress it at surface, and then we get into afterflow. When you are running a ball and sleeve, it is no longer thought of as afterflow. It is ball separation time. Because that ball wants to go on to bottom when the rate gets to a certain amount, correct? It's going to fall against the least path of resistance. If you're moving on a heavy tungsten ball, if you're moving 1.4 million, it will not go anywhere. It is going to sit there until that rate gets down. Or you can manipulate on that lubricator. We talked about those valves. You can tell I like to teach, can you? But when you manipulate those valves, you can create back pressure on the well because that plunger comes up and blocks part of that flow. So what happens? The well builds in pressure. The higher the pressure builds, that comes into play with that rate, and that ball will fall and it'll take off. I only need that ball to go 2,000 feet and I'll release that sleeve because it's impossible for it to catch it. And you don't want it to catch it before it gets to bottom. So that ball is taken ahead, because remember that ball is an 1.11 inch inside of that 2 7/8 tubing. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of wall and space in there, so it's falling at a high rate. Remember, as soon as I come back on, I'm flowing maybe 1.8 million, maybe 2 million. And that ball is falling and that sleeve is falling with it. And I'm back open. And so then I'm back open and what I'm waiting for is for those to fall to bottom and marry up. Ball gets inside the sleeve, comes back to surface and sweeps that to me. Because I'm open so much, that fluid's scattered. And I'm picking it up as I come. I'm bringing the male and I'm unloading that fluid at surface and I'm starting that again. And that's why that makes gas assist so efficient, because you're cleaning that tubing. You're not slug flowing. There's a little slug flow when you get to the surface. I mean, some of these wells that are 200, 250 barrels, you may unload 3 barrels a run. I mean, it will shake the world when you're standing by that wellhead. I probably should have had a good picture of that today where you could just watch that. So it's really imperative that you understand the product, where you're at. You don't want to run a ball and sleeve when you get below 30 barrels. And the reason is that ball and sleeve falls 2,100 feet a minute. I'll say that again, 2,100 feet a minute. When I talked earlier about impacts, that's an impact. There better be some fluid there. There better be some flow rate slowing all this stuff down. That's why we use the titanium spring. That's why we like to get in the curve to at least 35 degrees to make that all run, to make it work together. So there's other plungers that we make that fall slower. You get into that lower fluid, let's don't fly to bottom. Let's slow it down. And another thing that I don't like to run a sleeve with, when I start getting, I don't want to be shut in when that ball hits bottom. The ball's what really does a lot of damage. I've seen a lot of fish necks that are coned, just dipped. Even the titanium. I could have brought stuff sitting on the desk. You wouldn't believe how much it'll mushroom just because people aren't operating it correctly or they don't know, you know.
Real quick, so the reason you want it to fall incredibly quick is just to get another run up?
That's right.
There's no other reason other...
That's right.
So if you're intermittent the well, it would be you wouldn't mind it falling at a much slower rate to prohibit
No.
damage.
You want it to fall slower if you're shut in.
But I tell you what I have found, and I found this in really just about every form of plunger lift. I've never disproved if neither unless a well just don't make hardly any fluid at all. More runs equal more money. They just do. Wells want to flow when they get released, when that fluid's off, just a little bit. I can remember my earlier days when I worked around Maple School. I mean, you know where that's at, around I-40, and I worked on Morrow wells that were 10,000 foot deep. And we were using plungers similar to this, but we were using titanium sleeves because titanium is very light, but it's impact resistant, and they're much more expensive. More expensive machine, everything, but so we would use titanium because it would lessen the blow hitting that ball on bottom. But those Morrow wells, you move a 5-gallon bucket of fluid, and man, here comes that rate because it's low pressure, high volume. But that's why I said this. There's just a lot of ways to skin the cat, and knowing where he's at is another thing. And here's just a few of the other plungers that we make. And what I really wanted to point out with this slide is the difference in slots. Bigger, smaller, and that's where you get into that point where if you don't need, and we've been talking, or I've been talking a lot about gas assist, but you know, there's still prolific wells that don't need gas assist. You know, they start out gas assist. We're weaning a lot of wells off compression. And that's our goal. That's always my goal, is to wean a well off gas assist or wean it down to the point to where I don't want it to do any more than it has to. Because my philosophy is, on plunger lift, is that the more back pressure, and gas injection creates back pressure on the reservoir. It's a given. So the more I put down it, the less that well wants to come to me. So if I can, that's how I start lining the well out. When I get the right product in it, boy, and when I drive up on location, when I'm trying to work with pumpers or anybody like that, I tell them, hey guy, get your eyes off that wellhead. See that compressor over there? He means everything to you. Everything. He's your source of need. He's it, because he is what's doing the job. So what I tell people is, and I had this conversation with a pumper the other day, and he was kind of expressing some of the frustration he's feeling when they come in and PM a compressor and then don't put it back where it was, because that changes everything. I said, man, if I'm you, right on that compressor, I need this much suction, this much RPM, and if it ain't there when you get done, we're going to have a talk. He needs to feel your pain, right? So that's where I like to start skinnying down that injection rate and make that well, because a lot of times if you've got long off time, you're going to buy some gas back in the off time. Anything over about 3 minutes, you're going to start buying gas. Even, you know, if your vessels and all, because you're going to pull that vessel down, the next thing you know, that valve opens up over there and you start buying that buyback. Even though you sold it to them, you don't, usually the luxury is we don't get to buy it back for the same price we sold it to them, because they're transporting it so far to us, right? Right around the compressor. So you kind of see where we're at on the different bypasses. Here's another, this is a really good example here. This is a 2 slot, this is a 5 slot. This 5-slot sliding sleeve will drop 2,000 feet a minute. This 2-slot will drop about 14. So it just depends where you're at. We have plungers and all kinds of variations where we've got pads on them. It's just, I couldn't show you enough pictures today, all the equipment that we run. And this here is the very end of the life cycle of the well to where we're running a pad plunger, where we've got to have this seal in the tubing, and we want to utilize every bit of that seal and get every drop of that fluid out we can. So I know I've kind of went long, and maybe, I guess it's long, but I've thrown a lot at you. If anybody's got any questions, man, even after this, I'd be more than glad to answer any questions I can to help you in any way. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Do you have any rule of thumb for setting the upper in a two-stage plunger?
I do, and it does depend on the amount of fluid that I'm running, but I like to be somewhere in that 36 to 40% off bottom. I've just had more success there than any other area. I have done some wells that don't move a lot of fluid, like some Mara wells out in the Texas Panhandle that move 2 barrels a day, but boy, because that gas, I'm going to use it to lift, not just sell it off. There's quite a bit of gas in 2 7/8 tubing. There's about 6 MCF that I'm not even using. So I'll move them a little higher. Yes, Andy?
Can you put that dump valve on stage 2?
Yes, sure can. We just started doing that about a year ago. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about liking to set the plungers at 35 degrees in curve. Do you have to have a tangent at 35, or can you set it in like a 8 to 12 degree per 100 build?
I don't guess I understand quite the question.
Well, if you got a horizontal well, you're building 35 degrees, you already started your build out of vertical.
Right.
Usually, you'll set, tangents 60, 70 degrees to where you just set like gas lift guys like 60 degrees, ESP guys seem like 70. So at 35, you're usually on a well,
Yeah, you're up.
Yeah, you're probably around 8 degrees per 100 build. Do you need to have a tangent, or can you set your stop?
I accept mine. I can get here's another good one to remember. In wireline work, you can get to 60 degrees. But what happens is you run out of jar work. Your weight of your jars get to where you can't do anything, and that's what gets you in trouble. But 50 degrees, you can set tools all day long at 50 degrees.
But you don't need
You don't need a tangent.
You don't need a tangent. No. No. Yeah.
But to piggyback off of that question, you're saying 35 degrees, and we've got people that are setting their bottom hole equipment, so nipples, packers, everything at 60.
Yeah.
Because the deviation from lateral for TBD might be 800 feet.
Right.
So you lose 800 foot of ability to lift once that well depletes enough to where, you're not able to circulate a plunger from 35 to
Right.
60 degrees.
Yeah.
So you still recommend that it's 35 degrees when you're losing 800 foot of TBD?
Yeah, and the reason I do it, you could look at it a lot of different ways than that, because you could see what that depth measurement really is. If it's not that much difference, you can go deeper. Or if you want to choose to use the ball and sleeve will do whatever you want it to. That ball will come back to you. You can set a spring, run your tubing in and run it at 75 degrees. That ball's only going to go to about 70. And it's going to sit there. But it will roll up to you if you have enough gas to get it there. But I always figure that, and the studies proved it out at EOG and some of the stuff that I've done, that it didn't make any difference if I put it at 55 or not. I still made the fluid. Because most of those wells, if you're that deep, your screened orifice is probably there too. And that screened orifice is good, unless you're off orifice and you're not even injecting anymore, and that's a whole different animal. Anybody else?
What's the deepest you've run a plunge?
Probably 68 degrees. And
No, depth.
oh, depth. 17,000 probably. Yeah.
Two-stage tool?
Deepest?
No, was that a two-stage?
No, it wasn't. Mm-mm. No. Run a lot of equipment, 12 and 14,000 every day. Just And you know, as long as that tubing's clean, it really don't know any different. It just, yeah.
What do you do if you know you got some sand in the well bore?
You pray. Well, we actually, the industry does have different methods for that. And what I normally do, the ball and sleeve plunger that I was talking about, and I don't know if this, what you're thinking of in the scenario is, it can handle a lot of sand.
Low energy.
Low energy. Then I would probably use a bar stock with some sand grooves and make it spin to where it can keep moving. We cut rifling on a lot of those plungers and make some jet holes and just keep a lot of stuff moving, you know, so where it doesn't stack. Yeah. And typically what we kind of find sometimes is you will have some problem with sand a little bit, but then as you keep fighting it, it gets better and better and better usually. You know, you get the well kind of cleaned up, because sometimes these wells have just been sitting there and they haven't been pulled this hard. I see it all the time. And everybody thinks as they're gas lifting, boy, this well's clean. You go stick a plunger on it and you turn the world loose. I mean, you get production you didn't have before because you're really cycling it a lot. You don't have all the friction up the tubing that you have because we're swiping it quick. You take like a Mississippi well up here that's springs it, like the one I've been working on is at 66.99. I mean, you can make trips so fast to make your head spin. This well makes about 50 barrels a day, and I've been testing a product that falls 1,900 foot a minute with a set of pads on it, which is kind of, I don't know that I want to really create something that drops that fast with a set of pads on it, but I just started pushing it to the atmosphere just as hard as I could do it just to see what my limitation was. And I'm making 5 minute, 40-second runs with 30 seconds of hard fluid. And I'm dropping the bottom in 1,900 feet. You know, that is bringing the farm. And you better be on when you come, and the first several runs I wasn't, but you're in 35 degrees. This well's 35, 36 degrees, so I'm good there because I do get a little brake system when I start getting there, you know. So I said this a while ago, and I'll close with this, is that, and I said it a while ago, if I own 300 wells and most of them I would have standing valves in them, just makes the world so much easier. You know, I remember my first days when I was working for Sandridge when I started my company, and we put a ton of systems on up by Highway 11, and we had no standing valves. And you do the wireline work, and you do all the stuff, the surface work, and you go to put the well back online. You might wait 2.5 hours to hit fluid, and you can't just walk off from a well and let it kick off by itself. And man, I called the guy with the company who I've had a long-standing relationship. Man, we get some standing valves in there. They're not in there? I said, no, sir, they're not. I said, but I'm telling you, you would make your first run, which would be a good run, and make a lot of fluid, but it'd make it. And you'd just take off. And the guy'd make one run, he'd get his truck and drive off because it's been doing it. It just makes the world so much easier as an operator and as a guy in the field. Yeah. You make the plunger run. You bully it. You put a standing valve in, you're the bully. You're going to run when I tell you to run. And if you don't run, I got a problem. You know, that's really nice insurance too, because you say, you know, if it's not running, I got a serious problem here. There's trash. There's a malfunction. We broke something. That happens. You know, I got one customer who says, Kevin, you know I can break it. I said, oh, I know you can. You've done it. You can break stuff. Nothing's perfect.
How does the standing valve hold up in situations with sand or calcium carbide, scale? I mean,
Well, you kind of remember the days. Maybe you don't remember. You formed. I don't know if you're feeding me a question or you're feeding. I thought so. I thought good feed. We put a lot of standing valves in wells really early on with Longfellow. I'll use their name because they're no longer existing here. And we put standing valves really deep. I mean, I'm talking 60 degrees. And sand, so much sand, we'd stick the plunger, have to take it out, clean it up, stick it back down. Take it out, clean it up, stick it back down, and get 4 or 5 of those runs. Those wells they fracked with a lot of sand there. And we pulled some of those wells, and those standing valves were good because lots of fluid was running through them. You know, they clean up like we do. Any more questions? Yes.
How much area do you have in IDs and ODs of these plungers and the tubing?
Okay, like I said before, like your tubing, and we got to get it, you know, you get into drift, but 2 7/8, let's take that. Your tubing's what, 2.441 ID, and that plunger is 2.34. That's the biggest I will run one. And sometimes we even run them less. You know, if we've got a customer that's got problems, we cut her, bring her in the machine shop, and we cut her and get her back out of the guys have got, usually the guys have got one on their truck. I'm like, man, how come you ain't got one of those, you know? Because I do own a machine shop, we can cut that. But we do that a lot. I mean, because you just don't have a perfect world like they're thinking. You may have a little tight spot. It ain't a bad one. It's just bad enough that, man, if I was 10 thousandths under that, and you'd be surprised. There's a breaking point in everything in life, and that 10 thousandths or 15 thousandths, if you're running gas assist, that is not going to hurt you. It's not. Now, on a conventional well, yes, it will hurt you because you need seal. But yes. Gentlemen, I thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much. I didn't bring a card or anything, but if anybody has any questions, and get a hold of me, I'd be more than glad to help you. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Kevin. All right, that concludes the meeting for today. Our next meeting will be April the 13th, and we'll have emails sent out then. Again, September 22nd for the golf tournament. And let me look and see. Sorry, I'm not prepared for the date of the kickoff lunch. I'm going to call it about September 14th. Does that sound right? Yes. I'm looking at our co-chair and events coordinator over here. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good week or weekend.